A massive corporation lost $2 billion overnight, all because they didn't realize the cute brand name they chose was actually the ancient, cursed name of a disease demon. And the worst part? If anyone at that company had spent 5 minutes applying what Jacob Grimm discovered nearly 200 years ago, the whole disaster could have been avoided. You're about to discover how some of the biggest companies in the world accidentally named their products after demons, monsters, and ancient curses, and how a simple method of tracing words back to their origins, something called the Grimm Method, keeps exposing the dark mythological roots hiding inside the brand names you see every single day. Let's start with the scandal that kicked this whole thing off. In late 1995, a team of marketers at Reebok sat around a table and sifted through roughly 1,500 potential names for their upcoming 1996 footwear line. They needed something that sounded strong, athletic, maybe a little edgy, something women would want to wear. They landed on a word that rolled off the tongue nicely. It sounded powerful. It sounded cool. They named the shoe Incubus. Now, if you're already cringing, you know where this is going. But here's what makes this story so jaw-dropping. Not one person in the entire naming process, not the marketers, not the designers, not the executives who signed off on it, not a single soul bothered to look up what the word actually meant. An incubus in medieval and ancient mythology is a male demon that descends upon sleeping women and sexually assaults them. The female equivalent is called a succubus, another demonic entity that feeds on human victims. This wasn't obscure knowledge buried in some dusty academic text. This was in dictionaries. It was in encyclopedias. You could have found it in about 10 seconds at any public library in America. And yet Reebok, a company that had built its entire reputation on women's athletic footwear, slapped this name on 53,000 pairs of shoes and shipped them to retailers across the country. The name didn't even appear on the shoes themselves, only on the boxes, which might explain how it slipped through the cracks for so long. But eventually, inevitably, someone noticed. On February 18th, 1997, ABC News broke the story. The reaction was immediate and brutal. Reebok spokeswoman Kate Burnham told the LA Times, "I'm horrified, and the company is horrified. How the name got on the shoe and went forward, I do not know. We are a company that has built its business on women's footwear. So to do anything that's denigrating to women is not what we're about." Another Reebok spokesman insisted the company was genuinely blindsided. "We had no idea," he said. 18,000 boxes were recalled. The brand damage was significant. And the whole thing became a textbook case study in what happens when you don't understand the words you're using. But here's the thing. The Reebok Incubus disaster wasn't a one-time fluke. It was a symptom of something much bigger. A pattern that keeps repeating because corporations treat names like empty vessels, like sounds without meaning. They pick words that feel right without ever asking where those words actually came from. And that's where the Grimm Method comes in. When you hear the name Grimm, you probably think of fairy tales. Cinderella, Rapunzel, Hansel and Gretel. But Jacob and Wilhelm Grimm weren't just storytellers. They were first and foremost linguists. And the reason they collected all those folk tales in the first place wasn't to entertain children. It was to study the German language. You see, the brothers Grimm had a radical idea. They believed that if you collected enough old stories, enough ancient words passed down orally through generations, you could trace the evolution of language itself. You could follow a word backward through time, watching its sounds shift and its meanings transform, until you arrived at its original root in Proto-Indo-European, the ancestral language that gave birth to most European languages. Jacob Grimm formalized this in what became known as Grimm's Law. Published between 1819 and 1837 in his work Deutsche Grammatik, what he demonstrated was that consonant sounds in related languages don't change randomly. They change systematically. There are patterns, rules. A P sound in Latin might consistently become an F sound in Germanic languages. That's why the Latin word pater became father in English and Vater in German. Same word, same root, different sounds, following a predictable pattern. This was revolutionary comparative linguistics in action. It meant you could take any modern word, apply these phonological rules, and reverse engineer its history. You could uncover what a word originally meant, what culture it came from, and what associations it carried thousands of years ago. Jacob Grimm essentially created the science of etymology as you know it today. And in 1835, Jacob published another work that's even more relevant to what you're learning right now. It was called Deutsche Mythology, or Teutonic mythology, and it was a comprehensive study of the mythological beliefs embedded in Germanic languages. He showed that ancient myths weren't just stories. They were fossilized inside the very words people used every day. You could excavate them if you knew how to look. This is what I call uncovering lost myths hidden in everyday words, the Grimm Method. And if modern corporations applied even a fraction of this thinking to their naming process, they would have avoided catastrophes that cost them millions, sometimes billions, of dollars. Let's look at what might be the most devastating naming disaster in modern corporate history. Imagine you are running a successful company, and your brand name is Isis. Not a bad name, right? In Egyptian mythology, Isis is one of the most powerful and beloved goddesses. She represents magic, wisdom, and motherhood. For decades, businesses proudly used this name. There was Isis Pharmaceuticals, a major biotech company. There was Isis Wallet, a mobile payment platform backed by AT&T T-Mobile and Verizon Wireless. There was Isis Equity Partners in Britain. There were salons, chocolate makers, non-profits, all sharing this elegant mythological name. Then, in 2014, everything changed. The Islamic State of Iraq and Syria, commonly known by the acronym ISIS, exploded onto the global stage with horrifying acts of violence and terror. Suddenly, every single business carrying that name found itself in an impossible position. The fallout was swift and merciless. In Queens, New York, the owner of Isis Nails saw her revenue plummet by approximately 30%. She eventually renamed the salon Best Nails and Spa because of harassment from customers and passers-by. In Chicago, a business owner changed her store name from Isis to My Sister's Circus. a Belgian chocolate maker that had rebranded to Isis in 2013, had to change again to Libiert. But the real financial carnage hit the big players. In July 2014, Isis Wallet announced it would rebrand as Softcard. The cost of redesigning logos, updating packaging, changing signage, replacing stationery, reworking all digital assets, that alone can run into the millions for a major company. Isis Equity Partners became Living Bridge. The International Species Information System became Species 360. Isis Performance became ISR Performance. One by one, organizations around the world were forced to abandon a name they'd invested years building equity in. And then there was Isis Pharmaceuticals. Their CEO, Dr. Stanley Crook, initially refused to budge. He told CNBC, "I don't feel like I want to capitulate to these terrorists by changing my name. They can change their name." You can understand the defiance. But the market didn't care about principles. Shares of Isis Pharmaceuticals fell 4% the day after the Paris terror attacks in November 2015, even though the company hadn't released any major news. The stock drop appeared to be driven purely by the name association. Their chief business officer, Sarah Boyce, later admitted to CNN Money that the company had been quietly working on a possible name change since the summer, because it was becoming more and more difficult to continue with our old name. On December 18th, 2015, the company officially announced it would become Ionis Pharmaceuticals. Boyce said something that should be engraved above the door of every corporate branding department in America. When you say your company name, you want people to think about the work you're doing, not an unfortunate namesake. When you add up the rebranding costs, the lost revenue, the stock price impacts, the destroyed brand equity across dozens of companies worldwide, the cumulative damage easily reaches into the billions. And here's the cruel irony. Not one of these companies did anything wrong. They named themselves after an ancient Egyptian goddess. The name was beautiful. It was meaningful. It was perfect. Until suddenly it wasn't. Now you might be thinking, this is a different kind of problem. Nobody could have predicted a terrorist organization would co-opt the name of an Egyptian goddess. And you'd be right. But the deeper lesson here isn't about prediction. It's about understanding that names carry weight. They carry history. They carry associations that can shift and mutate in ways you never expected, especially when those names are rooted in mythology. Because mythology has always been a double-edged sword for brands. When it works beautifully. Nike is named after the Greek goddess of victory, and you feel that power every time you see the swoosh. Amazon evokes the fierce warrior women of Greek legend. Hermes carries the elegance of the god of commerce. Asus takes its name from Pegasus, the winged horse of the gods, dropping the first two letters to create a cleaner corporate identity. But when it goes wrong, it goes catastrophically wrong. Take Nvidia, the chip giant now worth over $1 trillion. Their name is pronounced like Nvidia, the Latin word for envy. The company chose it deliberately for its connection to vision and seeing. But if you dig a little deeper, the way Jacob Grimm would have, you discover something unsettling. In magical folklore, envy, or the evil eye, is considered the principal vice that motivates demons. It is the driving force behind the biting eye of witches who cast spells with poisonous tongues. You are walking around with a graphics card in your computer named after the demonic evil eye, and it is one of the most successful tech companies on the planet. Then there's Palantir Technologies, the surveillance and data analytics company now valued at over $45 billion. Its founders, including Peter Thiel, deliberately named it after the Palantiri from Tolkien's Lord of the Rings, the seeing stones that let you peer across vast distances. But in the story, the Palantiri carry a hidden cost. The more you use them, the easier it becomes for you to be corrupted by a dark will behind their power. A surveillance company named after a tool of corruption. You can't make this stuff up. And don't forget AIDS, the diet candy that was trademarked in 1946 and sold successfully for decades, until the AIDS epidemic emerged in 1981. The company's CEO desperately tried to hold on, insisting that their product does not give anyone AIDS. It didn't matter. The brand was dead. They tried rebranding as Diet AIDS. That didn't work either. The company folded. What you're seeing across all of these cases is a fundamental failure to apply the Grimm Method, to trace words back to their roots and understand the full spectrum of meaning they carry. This is etymology in action, or rather, the complete absence of proper etymological research. When you pick a name, you're not just choosing a sound. You're choosing an entire mythology. You're choosing thousands of years of associations, beliefs, fears, and cultural memory. And if you don't do the work of uncovering lost myths hidden in everyday words, those associations will eventually surface, often at the worst possible moment. This is why the Grimm Method matters more now than ever. You live in an age where information spreads at the speed of a tweet. A brand name that might have survived decades of mild obscurity in the past can be destroyed in hours today. Brand expert Lida Citron put it perfectly when she said, "The brand is an emotional thing. When companies choose their names, they do so because we want that consumer to feel something. When something like this potentially could be damaging, it has to be considered." There is even a legal dimension to this. You cannot actually trademark a mythological figure. They are in the public domain. You can trademark a specific logo design featuring a mythological figure, but the names themselves belong to everyone. Which means when you build a billion-dollar brand around a mythological name, you're building on ground you don't fully own. Anyone, including a terrorist organization, can use it, and there is nothing you can do about it. The tragedy is that the tools to prevent these disasters have existed since 1819. Jacob Grimm showed you how to trace the history of a word. He showed you that languages evolve according to patterns, and that ancient myths are fossilized inside modern vocabulary. His work on Teutonic mythology mapped the connections between words and the gods, demons, and monsters they once described. The 33-volume German dictionary he and Wilhelm began in 1838, which was not completed until a full century later, remains one of the most ambitious attempts in history to catalog the hidden meanings inside language. And yet, in late 1995, a room full of highly paid marketing professionals at one of the world's biggest shoe companies picked the name Incubus for a women's athletic shoe. And nobody, not one person, thought to check. So here is what you take away from all of this. Every word you use, every brand name you encounter, every company name you see on a billboard or a stock ticker carries a hidden history. Some of those histories are glorious, some are dark, some are sitting there like unexploded ordnance, waiting for the right cultural moment to detonate. The Grimm brothers understood this nearly 2 centuries ago. They knew that uncovering lost myths hidden in everyday words was not just an academic exercise. It was a way of understanding the invisible forces that shape how you think, how you feel, and ultimately, how you spend your money. The next time you see a brand name, any brand name, ask yourself, what does that word actually mean? Where did it come from? What ancient story is hiding inside those syllables? Because if a $2 billion catastrophe has taught you anything, it is this: the myths are not lost. They are just waiting for you to find them. And if you do not find them first, they will absolutely find you.